Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Glad to have this man back. It is constitutional law attorney for President Trump. It's Jesse Binnall. Jesse, how are you? Good to see you again.
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks so much for having me today.
You're very welcome. So I'm still confused about this case in New York, and I'm going to tell you where my confusion comes from. You and I spoke before. You know that I'm not dumb, but I just can't seem to wrap my brain around what President Trump was charged with in this case. And it appears as though Alvin Bragg, even after the verdict comes back from the jury, still doesn't want to tell us what the actual charge was. Do you know what the charge was?
I'm not sure anybody knows what the charge is. This is worse than the Soviet system of
Right.
Conviction first, and then they'll let you know what the allegations were. That's in essence kind of what happened here, which is Alvin Bragg apparently had some very weird federal campaign finance law theory. That there was business records that were falsified in order to violate some federal campaign finance law. The only problem is every campaign finance law attorney in the country who's honest says, well, that's not a violation of campaign finance law. That's
Right.
Matter of fact, if they did it the opposite way, the way that apparently the state of New York thinks they should have done it, that would have actually been a violation of campaign finance law. So it was just a backwards theory from the beginning, but they wouldn't even say what their theory was until closing arguments. And what's worse, the way that they did closing arguments, they made President Trump's lawyers go first, and then in their closing arguments, when President Trump's lawyers couldn't rebut it, that's when they finally told the jury what their theory was, when it could never be rebutted. That is, I think, the very heart of a due process violation. But let's ignore the fact that there was no factual basis for this case. Ignore
Right.
the fact that there was no legal basis for this case. Let's ignore the fact that the number 3 lawyer at the Department of Justice left his cushy, prestigious job to go join the local prosecutor's office in Manhattan so he could prosecute his political adversary. And then let's just look at the fact that the Supreme Court was very, very clear about a official act immunity in the Trump versus U.S. case that came down in July. That is absolutely dispositive in this case. It has to be dismissed. But Judge Merchan is going to look at every way that he possibly can to avoid having the egg on his face that requires him to dismiss this case. So he keeps pushing it out and pushing it out. And, I mean, certainly it's a good thing that he's not proceeding to sentencing right now. That's excellent. But if he thinks what he can do is hold this case over the head of the President of the United States for 4 years, thinking he can effectively influence the President of the United States by holding a sentencing over his head,
Right.
That's something that absolutely violates the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. It would lead to a constitutional crisis if it's allowed to stand, and it must not stand for any number of reasons. This case has to be dismissed, and if Judge Merchan won't dismiss it, we need to have an honest judge step in and honest authority come in and do the trick, because this case is dead. It's gone. It needs to go away.
BINNALL.com. Binnall, it's Binnall.com. Jesse Binnall, we appreciate the time.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe.
No, we're not done. We've got a lot to go.
All right,
But I do appreciate you making it happen. A writ of mandamus would mandate that the judge has to do something now, right? Can a writ of mandamus be brought up and either this judge does something or you go over his head to the appellate court in New York and say, can you make the guy do something? They're literally saying, Bragg is saying, Merchan appears to be saying, we're going to wait 4 years and then get him afterwards.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so writ of mandamus is one method that they could go about this. I don't know which direction the New York trial team is going to go with it. The one thing I know is that they're some of the best lawyers that I've ever had the opportunity to know in my life. So I know that they're going to come up with the right strategy. But what a writ of mandamus does is it goes to a higher authority and says there is a lower authority that is clearly abusing their discretion in such a way that there's really no debate about it. They are just plain wrong. And higher authority, higher court, you need to correct them. And so, that would be, I think, one way to go about that is through a writ of mandamus. And so, yeah, that would be, I think,
because Jesse, he can't appeal until there's final judgment, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, that's right. There's always some quirks in New York law. New York law allows interlocutory appeals more than any other system that I'm aware of. And many times, you can bring a writ of mandamus. For instance, in the federal system, there are times that you can bring a writ of mandamus even though that there's no final order. For instance, when we represented General Flynn, there was a writ of mandamus against Judge Sullivan when he refused to dismiss the case after the government.
That was so nuts. Wasn't that nuts? The guy said, I know you want it dismissed. Nobody wants to prosecute, but I'm not going to let you. What was that?
Exactly. And Judge Merchan, seems to be channeling Judge Sullivan in that case as much as he can in this New York case.
It is Jesse Binnall. We really appreciate the time and the access. So as we're looking at it, we also know that the instructions from the judge were completely flawed. We know that telling a jury, the 12 of you, 4 of you can think this, 4 can think that, 4 can think the other thing. We can call it somehow unanimous, which it's not. I had Rudy Giuliani on recently. He said, we have never, ever had a jury verdict that didn't have to be unanimous since the Magna Carta. So we're looking at a guy who was making it up as he went. And I guess what I don't understand, because I'm a rational guy, and I'm fair-minded. If a judge is doing a job so badly during the prosecution of the actual case, is there no mechanism to say, hey, wait a second, this guy doesn't see, either he doesn't know what he's doing, or he's doing this on purpose? Is there nothing you can do as he's sitting on the case?
Well, usually there's very little you can do when a judge is on the case until after the case is over. But you're exactly right. When you have something that is so clear that the sanctity of trial by jury, and that in a criminal case it has to be unanimous before you have a conviction, is a bedrock principle of American law. And the fact that he ignored that, the fact that he's ignored other due process protections that we've talked about, the fact that he has ignored the constitutional issues of separation of powers and presidential immunity, just shows that he has very little disregard for the law. And what's very clear is he has telegraphed to the world that he is an opponent of Donald Trump, that he, when he donated money, no matter how small the amount, when he donated money to Joe Biden when he's on the bench. And let me just say, I've known a lot of judges. I've clerked for a judge. I've known a lot of judges of various different political persuasions in my life. I have never known a judge that makes political donations while they're on the bench. It is unheard of. And the fact that he wasn't required to disqualify himself, and the fact he didn't do it voluntarily when that came out, just shows how backwards this is, and that this isn't a trial that really is deserving of any credence. Right. Because of the fact that you had a judge that threw his judicial responsibilities of impartiality completely to the wind. I think it was a violation of civil rights under color of law. And in my mind, I think he should be prosecuted for it.
Is the gag order still in place? People ask me that all the time. And if it is, does that mean the president of the United States can't talk about this at all for 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think a great question. And I think, as of right now, yes, the gag order still is in place.
How?
And it's absolutely insane that it is. But, if a judge thinks he can unilaterally, if a state court judge thinks that he has the power to gag the president of the United States, that's something that I think that the federal courts and the Supreme Court would, they wouldn't necessarily be anxious to take up that question, but I think they would have to at that point, because you cannot have a system where a state court judge can tell a president of the United States what he can and cannot say from the bully pulpit. It's
Jesse Binnall. Binnall.com is his law firm. Go to the website, constitutional law attorney for President Trump. As we're watching this case unfold, I always thought the rule was if there's just the appearance of some sort of bias, even if, let's say, Merchan is not biased, you and I think he is, but let's say that he's not. But there's an appearance that he is because his daughter is raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, in campaign funds for Harris on the trial itself. Doesn't any judge who's worth his or her weight in dirt say, I can't be on this case? It just looks bad.
That's absolutely right. And I've known good judges my whole life, and they have got appointed sometimes to very high-profile cases that, quite frankly, I think a lot of judges would like to be a part of. But for whatever reason, Whether it might be a relationship that they have with defense counsel or a
Right.
prosecutor or something like that. They have said, I am not the right judge for this case. I'm going to recuse myself because there are other judges that can be impartial, not only be impartial, but that the public will know that they're being impartial. Because one of the most important things in our system is that the public is able to rely that our system of justice is done fairly and done impartially. And the American people they don't think that here.
Of course not.
And what Judge Merchan didn't bank on, because the fact is he's not very good at law, but he's even worse at politics, is that the American people saw right through him, and they saw right through Alvin Bragg, and they saw right through Michael Colangelo, and they saw that this was the use of our justice system to meet a political objective, not a legal objective, and it made them support Donald Trump even more. It made it so that they were willing to crawl over broken glass and hot coals in order to get to the ballot box in order to vote for him. So I think it absolutely backfired on them. But it's something that should have never happened, and it should never happen again. The only way that it never happens again is if we make it very clear that there are consequences for the politicalization of our justice system.
I think you're 100% right. It's Jesse Binnall. Go to Binnall.com, constitutional law attorney. Last thing on this. That case is basically a nuisance NDA case. The money was handled through his lawyer, and they listed it as a legal fee. Jesse, again, I don't think I'm dumb. I don't know what the charges are. And the FEC, by the way, said there's nothing here. We're not going to investigate it. There is no election finance problem. How did they get this in front of a jury? Again, I always think that we're as impartial as we can be, or impartial as we can be in the court system. This one is completely biased, and it has been since day one. When Alvin Bragg first came out, and he said 34 charges, and somebody literally said, what are the charges? I don't have to tell you that. He said that in his opening press conference a year and a half, 2 years ago. So how are we here? And again, I guess I keep asking the same question, but I'm hoping that there is a mechanism. Is there no way to stop a flawed garbage case like this from ever seeing the light of day?
Joe, in order to do it, we have to have fair prosecutors, and we need to have fair judges.
Right.
That's why our system depends on that. One of the things that the founders talked about is that we have a great system for immoral people. And if you have people that are willing to set aside these norms in order to meet their own corrupt ends, then our system is no better than the paper it's written on.
Crazy.
And so we need to have better judges and better prosecutors, and we need to hold people accountable when they violate the law this way. Because when I say that there is no factual basis for this case, what you just said is exactly right. When you settle a nuisance claim with an NDA, that is not something that applies to campaign finance law at all. And it's not a campaign finance violation. The case should have never been brought. They were just desperate for anything that could try to allow them to use the jury box instead of the ballot box to attack Donald Trump, because they figured that the jury pool in Manhattan was going to be unfavorable to him.
Well, as you said, it ended up working against them because he got more popular the more charges they brought. I wonder if you can give me a quick note on the Leticia James case. The New York State Court of Appeals, for those watching and listening, the Court of Appeals is the highest court in New York. The Supreme Court is under it in New York State. They are a left-leaning court, and they lit up her prosecutors and her associate prosecutor, assistant prosecutor, like crazy, to the point to where at the end, they almost sounded like they were begging to not be sanctioned over this garbage case that was brought by Leticia James. They haven't ruled on that yet. When do you think they will? And will they rule according to what you and I saw in those hearings? It looks like the court is disgusted by what Leticia James did.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I believe it was the appellate division. So I think it was the intermediary appellate court in New York. But why that's important is these are still New York City judges. Again, these are people that have lost their MAGA hats a long time ago, probably.
Right, and they weren't having it though, Jesse.
But that's right, because they at least appeared from their behavior on the bench to be judges that were willing to follow the law, not their individual feelings for a party, or their political feelings for a party. And they know that the Leticia James case is garbage. The idea that you can try to creatively use these statutes in order to target somebody individually when the lenders at issues said we have no problem with these loans. We didn't rely on the information that you're making such a big deal about one way or another. And on top
they do
of
it
that,
again. They lend them more money.
Yeah.
I mean, so again, she ran to say, I'm going to get Trump. To me, in a free society where we've got constitutional rights, that appears to be a problem if you're the top cop of the state of New York.
It's more than a problem, Joe. It's a crime. Prosecutors are obligated. The Supreme Court, in a decision over a century ago, said it's the prosecutor's job to pursue justice, not convictions. And when a prosecutor takes and uses their power in order to go violate somebody's civil rights, to attack somebody because of the way they have exercised their First Amendment rights as a candidate for office or for their political opinions, then that is a violation of civil rights. And that means it's a violation of civil rights under color of law, which is a federal offense.
Wow.
It's a federal offense that should be very seriously prosecuted.
So when Pam Bondi gets in there, she is the Attorney General select by President Trump. Hopefully she gets confirmed. She gets in there. Does she look at Matthew Colangelo and his connection to Merrick Garland and their connection to the Bidens? Do you look at Fannie Willis and her boyfriend Nathan Wade, who did go and meet at the White House several times about this case in Fulton County? Can you go through all of that on a federal level, even though they're state charges?
We should, Joe. She should do that, and I very much hope that she will do that. I think she is going to be a ferocious and ethical prosecutor, and that doesn't mean that we do what the other side has done and target their political opponents. But what it does mean is that we hold people accountable who did. Is that when those people went out and used their positions in government in order to meet a political objective and try to actually destroy our legal system by injecting politics in it, it is critically important that those people be held accountable. And you're exactly right. Fannie Willis, Leticia James, Alvin Bragg, and quite.
But Jack Smith, Jack Smith,
who
was selected, wasn't even done right, wasn't confirmed, and he's just packing his box like he's going to ride off into the sunset. He should be questioned, shouldn't he?
He absolutely should be, and that should be at the very top of the agenda of the new Department of Justice is holding to account people who have engaged in lawfare.
Such a smart dude. It's Jesse Binnall. I really appreciate you coming on. Constitutional law attorney for President Trump, Binnall.com. And Jesse, let's do it again. Thanks for making time today.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe.
All right, brother. We're back after this. Stay right here.